Hi everyone! Today we're continuing the build of the P-39 Airacobra. In the previous video, I showed you how I assembled the airframe, and today I'll take you through the painting process. I'll show you how to paint the olive drab finish in a way that makes the aircraft look really worn and heavily weathered. I started by applying a silver primer. As usual, I used Gunze's AVC02. Then, in the areas most exposed to damage and wear, I sprayed zinc chromate yellow. The next step was to do the pre-shading. I highlighted all the panel lines and some of the rivet lines this way. Instead of using pure black paint, I went with a mix of olive drab and black. I filled the spaces between the panel lines with a marble coat, using the same mix as for the pre-shading. It's quite a tedious process and takes a lot of time, but at the same time, this painting method is simple, and any mistakes are easy to fix. Next, I gradually applied olive drab in several thin, transparent layers. Even though MRP paints are already heavily thinned, I added a bit more thinner to the mix. Since the color turned out too dark, I decided to apply a much lighter color as the next layer. I chose Middle Stone. Then I applied additional layers using a mix of olive drab and Middle Stone. As olive drab fades over time, it tends to become more yellowish. This is how the wing surface looks. As you can see, it's still a bit too contrasty, so I'm applying a thin layer of olive drab paint to blend everything smoothly. I'm adding a bit of weathering with a very heavily thinned mixture of olive drab and middle stone. It's time to paint the markings. I won't go into detail here because I recently uploaded a separate video where I show step-by-step how to do it, and how to make your own masks for painting the roundels. I also painted the serial numbers using masks I received from a friend. Another easy way to enhance the model's appearance is to paint the anti-slip walkways and walkway lines. The colors are applied so I can start weathering. I begin with paint chipping. Using sandpaper and sanding sponges, I remove paint in areas most exposed to damage. I focus on the walkways, the wing surface around the access panels, and the leading edges. Historical photos are helpful, as they often show paint wear in these areas. Where I've worn down to the plastic, I touch up the damage with silver paint. In the photo of this aircraft, one of the panels behind the pilot's cockpit appears lighter in color, likely replaced in field conditions. That's why I repainted this panel using a mixture of olive drab and middle stone to make it stand out from the rest. Next, I applied the decals, the unit emblem, and stencils. The next step was to weather the decals and stencils so they matched the rest of the aircraft's surface. I used a Trizact sanding disc and very carefully sanded the decals and stencils. I did it gently because they weren't protected with a clear coat. Next, I used heavily thinned paint to tone down the stencils a bit and make them blend in better with the base color. As a result, the stencils no longer stand out as much as they did before. It's time for some weathering. I found some very interesting photos showing dark leaks around the cockpit area and the aircraft's nose. I'll try to recreate that. Here you can see the final result. I'll show you in a moment how I achieved it. Most of the effects were achieved using oil washes. First, I applied a heavily thinned wash in areas where dirt would accumulate, such as around the fuel filler cap and the nearby inspection panels. I also applied the wash into the panel lines on the wing. I work on a matte or satin surface, which absorbs the oils more, so I apply the wash to small areas at a time. When needed, I blend the excess with a brush dampened with white spirit or turpentine. Remember that a wet wash looks much darker than it does when dry. At first, it might seem too contrasty, but once it dries, it might actually need to be reinforced. That's why I apply the wash gradually and sometimes go back to areas I've already worked on to add another layer. Using the same color, I create stains in the engine section to simulate streaks and accumulated grime. Here too, I apply a darker wash into the panel lines. I also focus on the area behind the exhaust pipes. These spots were heavily soiled, with traces of soot and oil being expelled from the engine. Although I'll add exhaust stains later, I'm already preparing the base for further weathering. I don't forget about the nose either. The streaks in this area were clearly visible in the photos. The first layer is just a wash that I let flow over the matte surface of the aircraft. While the oils on the nose are drying, I go back to the area behind the cockpit and add another layer of grime. To create larger streaks, I apply a bit of dark oil paint and then blend it out with a soft brush. And another layer of oils in the engine section. As you can see, once it dries, the contrast is significantly reduced. I'm also adding more staining on the wings. Finally, I can glue the exhaust pipes in place and paint the exhaust stains. The exhaust stains on the P-39 had a very distinctive shape, which I intend to recreate. First, I used heavily thinned black paint, then added some white streaks in the center. That's it for the weathering on this aircraft. All that's left is to glue on the remaining parts and place the model on its base. You can watch the painting process of the base on my channel. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.